She never imagined that sheltering a wounded soldier during the storm would bring a general to her doorstep. The rain was merciless that night. Thunder shook the walls of her small cottage at the edge of the village. She was alone, as she had been for years, when she heard it, a desperate pounding at her door. What would you have done? Most would have ignored it. The war had taught everyone to mind their own business, to look away, to survive by staying invisible. But something in that knock spoke to her soul. She opened the door. There he was. A soldier, barely standing, blood mixing with rainwater, his uniform torn and muddy. His eyes held a plea that words couldn't form. He was the enemy. She knew it. The insignia on his collar told her everything she needed to know. You see, in war, we're taught to see uniforms, not humans. We're taught to see sides, not souls. But in that moment, she saw something else entirely. She saw her own son, the son she'd lost 2 winters ago, the son who might have knocked on someone else's door, bleeding and afraid, hoping for mercy in a merciless world. Her hands trembled as she pulled him inside. What makes someone risk everything for a stranger? Is it courage? Is it madness? Or is it something deeper, something that refuses to let humanity die even when the world demands it? She dragged him to her kitchen table. His breathing was shallow, the wound in his side was deep. She had no medical training, just the herbs her grandmother had taught her to use, and the stubborn refusal to watch another young man die. The storm raged on as she worked through the night. Every flash of lightning illuminated his face, so young, perhaps 20, maybe less. His hands, now still, bore the calluses of a farmer, not a soldier. How many soldiers are just boys who were handed guns instead of plows? She cleaned his wound with boiled water and the last of her wine. Her fingers moved with a certainty that surprised her. Perhaps we all carry healing in our hands when we choose to use them. Perhaps every act of kindness is a small rebellion against a world that teaches us to be cruel. He mumbled in his delirium. Words in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was universal. He called for his mother. They all do in the end. Every soldier from every army, in every war that has ever been fought. She held his hand and hummed the lullaby she used to sing to her son. The same melody that had soothed scraped knees and nightmare tears. Music doesn't need translation. Comfort speaks all languages. By dawn, his fever had broken. She could have turned him in. There was a reward for enemy soldiers, enough gold to keep her fed through winter, enough to fix her leaking roof, enough to buy safety in a world where safety was the most expensive commodity. But she looked at him sleeping on her floor, wrapped in her son's old blanket, and she knew some things are worth more than gold. Some choices define who we are when no one is watching. She made him soup from the last of her vegetables, fed him like she once fed her child, 1 spoonful at a time. His eyes, when they finally focused, held surprise and something else, gratitude so deep it needed no words. This is the moment to ask yourself, when have you been that soldier? When has someone shown you kindness you didn't deserve? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that humanity still exists. Like this video if you believe in the power of compassion to change the world. For 3 days, she hid him. 3 days of jumping at every sound, of peering through curtains at every passing villager. 3 days of sharing her meager food and watching him slowly return to life. He tried to leave on the 2nd day, stood up, swayed, and collapsed back onto the straw mattress she'd made for him in the root cellar. She scolded him in her language. He apologized in his. Somehow, they understood each other perfectly. Isn't it strange how we can communicate without words when we choose to? On the 3rd night, he was strong enough to sit at her table. They shared bread and the last jar of preserves she'd been saving. He showed her a photograph from his pocket, water-damaged, but still visible. A young woman holding a baby, his wife, his child. She showed him her son's photograph. They sat in silence, 2 souls understanding that war takes from everyone, regardless of which flag flies over their home. He drew pictures to communicate, simple sketches that told his story. A farm, much like the ones in her village. Parents who looked as weathered and worried as any parent anywhere. A life interrupted by men in uniforms who spoke of duty and honor and other words that mean nothing to the dead. She drew her own pictures. Her husband, gone 10 years now. Her son, eager to prove himself, eager to serve, eager in the way only young men can be when they haven't yet learned that glory is just another word for grief. They laughed. Can you imagine? In the middle of war, in the shadow of danger, they found laughter. He drew a terrible picture of a cow. She drew an even worse chicken. For a moment, the world shrunk to just that kitchen, just two humans sharing the absurdity of life. That's when they heard the voices outside. Soldiers, many of them. Their boots thundered against the cobblestones like war drums. She recognized the authority in their cadence. These weren't regular patrols. These men were searching for something specific, for someone. The wounded soldier understood immediately. His face went pale, but not with fear for himself. He looked at her with eyes that said everything. I'm sorry. I've brought death to your door. Run. But she didn't run. Do you know what she did instead? She grabbed her shawl, mussed her hair, and pinched her cheeks hard enough to bring tears. She opened the door before they could knock, wailing like a madwoman about her stolen chickens. She clutched at the nearest soldier, begging him to find her precious hens. The soldiers exchanged glances. A crazy old woman, they thought, harmless, pathetic. They pushed past her, but she followed, maintaining her act, grabbing at their sleeves, demanding justice for her imaginary chickens. Have you ever wondered how many heroes history has forgotten because they looked like harmless old women? They searched her cottage cursory, eager to escape her theatrical grief over poultry. They missed the cellar door, hidden beneath a worn rug and a heavy table she'd dragged over it that morning. They missed the bloodstains she'd scrubbed almost invisible. They missed everything because they saw what they expected to see, poverty and madness, not courage. As they left, their leader turned back, an older man with eyes that had seen too much. He studied her for a long moment. Did he know? Did he choose not to see? Some mysteries are better left unsolved. When their footsteps faded, she collapsed against her door. Her hands shook so violently she couldn't hold the water cup the soldier brought her from his hiding place. He knelt beside her, this enemy soldier, and held the cup to her lips with the tenderness of a son. If you've ever been saved by a stranger's courage, subscribe to this channel. We tell stories that remind us why humanity is worth fighting for, one small act at a time. That night changed everything. The soldier knew he couldn't stay. His presence put her in danger every moment. But he also knew he couldn't leave without repaying a debt that could never truly be repaid. He told her, through gestures and drawings, that he needed to reach the mountain pass. His unit would be there, what was left of it. From there, he could disappear, report himself dead, find his way home to his wife and child. The war was almost over anyway. Everyone could feel it in the air. That exhausted readiness for peace that comes when both sides have lost too much to remember what they were fighting for. She knew the mountains, every path, every hidden trail. Her son had played in those hills, and she had searched every inch of them when he didn't come home, hoping against hope to find him wounded but alive. What makes us help those who might have hurt us? She drew him a map, not just any map, but the secret ways known only to locals, the paths shepherds used, where springs could be found, where caves offered shelter. She gave him her husband's old coat, civilian clothes that would help him blend in. She packed what food she could spare. On his last night, neither of them slept. They sat by her small fire, sharing the silence of two people who had created a moment of grace in a graceless time. He tried to give her his wedding ring. Payment, he gestured. She closed his fingers around it and shook her head. Some things shouldn't be bought or sold. Before dawn, she walked him to the edge of the village. The mountains loomed dark against a sky just beginning to lighten. They stood there, this unlikely pair, knowing they would never meet again, but forever changed by their brief intersection. He took her hands in his, rough hands that had held weapons and planted seeds, that had destroyed and created. He said something in his language, and though she didn't understand the words, she understood the meaning. "Thank you. I'm sorry. You saved my soul as much as my life." She watched him disappear into the morning mist, praying to whatever forces governed this universe that he would make it home. That somewhere a young woman would get her husband back, a baby would know its father. Life returned to its rhythm. She tended her garden, mended clothes for neighbors, survived. But something had changed in her. That spark of purpose that comes from knowing you've chosen correctly when the choice mattered most. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The war ended with the exhausted whimper that most wars end with, not with glory or triumph, but with the simple recognition that there was nothing left to win. Soldiers began returning home. Not her son, never her son, but other mothers' children, walking like ghosts through streets that would never quite feel the same. She thought that was the end of her story. A moment of kindness in an unkind world, a secret she would carry to her grave. But life has a way of connecting threads we think have been cut. One morning, a month after the armistice, she woke to find her garden transformed. Someone had fixed her fence during the night. Her woodpile, nearly depleted, had been replenished. Fresh vegetables she hadn't planted appeared in neat rows. Magic? Hardly. But wasn't there something magical about kindness returning to find you? This continued for weeks. Small repairs done in darkness, anonymous gifts left at her door. The village buzzed with speculation about her secret benefactor. She had her suspicions, but kept them locked in her heart. Then came the morning that would change everything. Again, she woke not to mysterious gifts, but to the sound of many horses, many voices, official voices, the kind that made villagers peer from behind curtains and mothers clutch their children closer. She opened her door to find the impossible. A general stood before her, not just any general, the enemy general whose name had been whispered in fear throughout the war. Behind him, an entire regiment waited at attention. The morning sun glinted off medals and polished boots, a display of power that seemed surreal in her humble garden. The general was an older man, weathered by command and loss. But his eyes, she knew those eyes. They were the same eyes that had studied her the day the soldiers searched her home. The same eyes, she realized with a start, that she'd seen in a younger face, fevered and frightened, calling for his mother. He dismounted and approached her with the careful respect one shows to royalty. The entire village was watching now, drawn by the spectacle of power visiting their forgotten corner of the world. He spoke in accented but clear words in her language. "I have come to thank the woman who saved my son's life." The world tilted. The wounded soldier she'd harbored, the farmer-turned-fighter, was this general's son. How was that possible? Don't powerful men's children avoid the dangers they send others to face? But then she remembered the photograph, the simple farmhouse, the weathered parents. Even generals, it seemed, had been farmers once. Even powerful men could lose their children to wars they commanded. He told the story to the silent crowd. How his youngest son had insisted on serving as a common soldier, refusing the safe commission his rank could provide. How he'd been wounded in a meaningless skirmish over a worthless hill. How he'd disappeared and been presumed dead until he stumbled home with a story of an angel who'd saved him. "I know what you risked," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know what it cost you to choose mercy over safety. I know because—" He paused, struggling with words that generals rarely say. "Because I have lost a son too, my eldest, 3 winters ago. The same winter she'd lost hers. Do you see how grief connects us all? How loss transcends the boundaries we build between us? Right now, if this story moves you, share it with someone who needs to remember that we're all human. Subscribe if you believe that compassion can bridge any divide." The general's visit wasn't just ceremonial. He'd brought wagons filled with supplies, not just for her, but for the entire village. Food, medicine, tools to rebuild what war had broken. He insisted it wasn't charity, but a debt partially repaid. "You gave me back my son," he said simply. "I can never balance that ledger, but I must try." The village watched in amazement as enemy soldiers, former enemy soldiers, worked alongside them to repair homes and plant fields. The same hands that had perhaps destroyed were now building. Isn't that the way of things? We all carry the capacity for both creation and destruction. The choice is always ours. The general stayed for 3 days, sleeping in a tent despite her offer of hospitality. Each evening, he would join her for simple meals, and they would talk. Two parents who had survived the unsurvivable, finding solace in shared understanding. He told her about his eldest son, a poet who'd wanted to be a teacher, a gentle soul who'd marched to war with verses in his pocket instead of hatred in his heart. He'd died trying to save a wounded comrade, enemy or ally. No one knew anymore. It didn't matter. She told him about her boy, how he'd carved wooden toys for village children, how he'd planned to modernize their small farm, full of dreams about new techniques and better harvests, how his last letter had been full of jokes trying to make her laugh, trying to pretend war was just another adventure. They shared the particular grief of parents who must outlive their children, the unnatural reversal of time's flow, the empty chairs that would always be empty, the conversations that would never be finished. On his last morning, the general made an announcement that stunned everyone. A school would be built in the village, funded by his family's wealth. It would welcome children from both sides of the former border. It would be named for two young men, his eldest son and hers, who would never teach or learn, but whose memory would educate generations about the cost of hatred and the value of mercy. "They died as enemies," he said, his voice carrying across the village square. "Let them be remembered as brothers." The general left, but the story didn't end there. How could it? True stories never really end. They ripple outward like stones thrown in still water, touching shores we never see. The school was built within a year. Children who would have been taught to fear each other learned side by side. The general's surviving son, the soldier she'd saved, came to teach there, bringing his wife and child. He walked with a limp from his wound. A permanent reminder of the night mercy found him in the storm. She became the unofficial grandmother to every child in that school. They would sit in circles around her as she told stories, not of the war, but of the time before and the hope for what came after. She taught them the old songs, the ones that existed before borders were drawn and sides were chosen. But the most extraordinary moment came on a crisp autumn day, 2 years after the war ended. A young woman arrived in the village, travel-worn and uncertain. She carried a baby and a burden of grief that made her look older than her years. She asked for the woman who'd saved the enemy soldier. The village, protective now of their local hero, was suspicious. Why did she want to know? When they finally met, the young woman's story tumbled out between tears. Her husband had been one of the soldiers searching houses that night. The older soldier with knowing eyes who'd studied her so carefully. He'd come home troubled, speaking of a brave woman and choices made in shadows. He died just months after the war ended, not from wounds, but from the poison of guilt that eats at good men who've done terrible things in terrible times. But before he died, he'd made her promise. "Find that woman. Tell her I knew. Tell her I chose not to see. Tell her she saved more than one soul that night." Can you imagine? The hunter and the hidden, the seeker and the secret keeper, bound together by a moment of mutual mercy. How many such moments happen in the darkness of human conflict, never recorded in history books, but written instead on hearts. Years flowed like water through cupped hands. The school grew, the village prospered in modest ways. She aged, as we all do, but with the particular grace that comes from knowing you've played your part well in the grand drama of existence. The soldier-turned-teacher became like a son to her. His children called her grandmother in 2 languages. When they were old enough, he told them the story of the night a stranger opened her door and chose love over law. They listened with the wide eyes of children hearing fairy tales, not quite believing such magic could exist in their ordinary world. But it wasn't magic, was it? It was something far more powerful and far more replicable. It was choice. Simple, human choice. The general visited every year on the anniversary of that stormy night. He would bring flowers for the memorial they'd built, not a monument to war, but to the peace that comes after. 2 names carved in stone, side by side, enemies made brothers by the alchemy of grief and grace. One year, journalists came. The story had spread, as stories do, transformed in the telling but true at its core. They wanted to make her a symbol, a saint, a hero for the ages. She refused every interview, every honor, every attempt to make her more than what she was. "I'm just a woman who opened a door," she would say. Anyone would have done the same. But would they? Would you? That's the question that haunts us, isn't it? In our comfortable lives, we tell ourselves we would be brave, we would be kind, we would choose correctly. But until the knock comes to our door on a stormy night, until the moment of choosing arrives, we never really know. She knew something most of us only hope, that in her pivotal moment she had chosen well. Not perfectly. She would be the first to admit her terror, her doubt, her very human desire to close that door and protect herself. But she had chosen, and that choice had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. In her final years, she became something of a pilgrimage site for the quietly brave. People would arrive at her cottage, soldiers seeking forgiveness, mothers mourning children, young people trying to understand how to live in a world that seemed increasingly divided. She would serve them tea and listen. Always listen. Sometimes they needed advice, but more often they needed what she'd given that wounded soldier years ago, the simple recognition of their humanity, the acknowledgement that they were more than their worst moments, more than their uniforms or nationalities or the sides history had assigned them. A philosopher visited once, eager to extract profound wisdom from her experience. He left frustrated. She had no grand theories, no elaborate moral frameworks, just stories about chickens and storms and the way kindness multiplies when you release it into the world. A politician came, hoping to use her story for his campaign about reconciliation. She served him the same tea as everyone else and told him about her garden. He left with dirt under his fingernails from helping her plant potatoes, understanding something about peace that no speech could convey. The children from the school would visit in groups, bringing her flowers and drawings. She kept every picture until her walls were covered with colorful depictions of the night that had become legend. In their innocent art, the soldier was sometimes an angel, sometimes a bird with a broken wing, sometimes just a scared boy far from home. All versions were true. One little girl asked her once, "Were you afraid?" "Terrified," she answered honestly. "Then why did you do it?" She thought for a long moment, watching the child's earnest face. How do you explain to someone so young that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it? How do you tell them that the biggest moments of our lives often arrive disguised as interruptions? "Because," she finally said, "fear is just one voice, love is another. I chose which one to listen to." She died on a spring morning, surrounded by the village she'd helped heal and the extended family her compassion had created. The soldier who'd knocked on her door held one hand. The general who'd searched for his son held the other. Enemies made family by one woman's refusal to let war have the last word. Her funeral became an unexpected gathering of former adversaries. Soldiers from both armies stood together, united in respect for someone who'd seen past their uniforms to their souls. The school closed for the day, and children lined the streets with flowers, their young voices singing the old songs she'd taught them. But perhaps the most moving tribute came from an unexpected source. The widow of the soldier who'd searched her house that night, the one who'd chosen not to see, stood to speak. She talked about how her husband's one act of mercy had haunted and ultimately healed him, how he'd spent his final months visiting families of men he'd killed, seeking forgiveness, building bridges across the chasms war had created. She showed him it was possible, the widow said. In that moment, when he could have destroyed her for harboring the enemy, he remembered he was human. That memory saved him. Do you understand what really happened in that small cottage? It wasn't just one act of kindness. It was a chain reaction of humanity, each link stronger than the last. The saved soldier who became a teacher, the general who built a school, the searching soldier who chose blindness, the village that learned to see former enemies as neighbors. This is how the world changes, not through grand gestures or political movements, but through individual humans choosing compassion over comfort, mercy over safety, love over law. Each choice creates possibility for the next person to choose better. She never saw herself as extraordinary. Right up to the end, she insisted she was ordinary, and she was right. The extraordinary thing is that ordinary people can change the world with ordinary kindness. The extraordinary thing is that her story could be your story, if you're willing to open the door. What doors are you keeping closed? What storms are raging outside while you stay safe inside? What wounded souls are knocking, hoping for the mercy that only you can provide? The world is full of soldiers far from home. Some wear uniforms, some wear business suits, some wear the disguise of anger or addiction or despair. They're all looking for the same thing, someone to see past their wounds to their humanity. You could be that someone. You could be the person whose kindness ripples through generations. You could be the one who refuses to let division win, who insists on seeing enemies as potential friends, who opens the door when everything says to keep it closed. Her story ends, but yours continues. The question is, how will you write it? If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power each of us holds to change lives, then be part of this community. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, share your own stories of unexpected kindness in the comments below. This channel exists for those who believe that small acts of compassion can transform the world, one open door at a time. Remember her words. Fear is just one voice, love is another. Which one will you choose to listen to? The choice is always yours. The door is always there, and somewhere, in a storm you can't yet see, someone is preparing to knock. Will you open it?